wow, this is really neat, because you're not just pointing people to the guidelines, you're actually talking about the process and the people that is necessary in order to execute on and to achieve people's best efforts when it comes to accessibility.
Yeah. Jonathan Hassel interviews Jennison Asuncion on embedding web accessibility as business as usual in a bank. Today I have Jennison Asuncion with me. Hi Jennison, how you doing?
Hey, good morning, Jonathan.
So he's a Canadian that almost everyone in the accessibility community knows, probably because he actually runs most of the accessibility communities out there. Jennison, I wanted to start with that. Start with your evangelism work. What makes you so passionate about web accessibility?
I think what makes me passionate about, I'll expand web accessibility to what I call digital accessibility, to include the mobile world as well, and whatever else is coming down the pipe, is because I, first of all, have been a direct beneficiary of what happens when stuff is accessible. And so I trace my success to having access to accessible learning, accessible work, etc., etc. So I feel really lucky that I've had that, and so it's my opportunity, as much as it might sound a little hokey, but it's my opportunity to give back, because I have had that really good opportunities myself. And there's so many interesting things to get done, which is what also motivates me. There's all this new technology that's coming out, and just figuring out a way to get people to think about accessibility and to talk about it. If people are comfortable coming to me to ask questions, then that means that I'm able to help open up that conversation and get them more informed. Sure. And so if I can play my small part in doing that, in making accessibility, quote unquote, accessible to the mainstream, primarily to the mainstream designer developer, then that's great. And I'll use that talented, whatever you want to call it, hopefully to help move things forward.
One of the ways you do that is organising the Global Accessibility Awareness Day every year. What inspired you to do that?
Back in 2011, it was probably November, December of 2011. I was home on a Saturday evening, which is a rarity for me, and caught a tweet from someone I didn't know at the time, Joe Devon. He was a back-end developer in Los Angeles, and he just tweeted about a blog post he wrote about how important it was for developers to understand accessibility. And because of some of the other stuff I've been doing before then with the accessibility camps and stuff like that, this is an interesting article. It was all about how he, as a developer, so this was he, who didn't have a disability, felt it was very important for developers to appreciate and to understand accessibility, and that it would be neat to have one day in a year where the focus would just be on accessibility. So when I saw that, of course, all these lights kind of turned on in my head because of the accessibility camp movement that I had been involved with, helping evangelize accessibility, and I was like, this is interesting and great, because I've been thinking about wanting to do a day-long kind of focused international day where we could do something like this. So I responded to his blog post and said to Joe, well, if you're interested in doing this, if I can give you a hand, let's do it. And then, long story short, fast forward to May 9th of last year, and we had events running in Mumbai, from Mumbai, India, to we had events in the UK, I had events all over Australia, and in the US and Canada. And we had some other events in Qatar and virtual events held all over the place. And it was all through the power of social media and through some great people who just rose to the occasion. And the whole concept of Global Accessibility Awareness Day is for that single day to think about, to learn about, and to experience digital accessibility. So globalaccessibilityawarenessday.org, I'll put the plug in there for that.
Please do.
You can certainly check that out, and depending on when in the year it is, we definitely encourage people to get involved.
You mentioned the organisation you work for.
Yes.
This is one of the largest banks in Canada.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So, and you also mentioned that that accessibility is important
Yes.
for your employer.
Yes.
Can you say why?
It's important because first of all, we want to be able, like any company, we want to be able to serve and attract both customers
Mm-hmm.
and potentially qualified employees with different disabilities, because we want to be reflective of the communities that we do work in. So at the company that I work for, we have executive level buy-in. We're embedded in the processes, the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Is it perfect? No company is. But I am so proud of where we are. I've been at the company now. I'm just starting year 7, and to have people like project managers now reaching out to us early in the game
Mm-hmm.
to come get our assistance so that they can plan for accessibility in their projects. And we get developers coming to us early because they're thinking of using a particular widget in a project, and they just want to make sure it's accessible. And they want to make sure that they have enough time that if it's not, that they can work to make it accessible so that it can be brought in when the thing goes live.
Sure.
And to think that we actually have procurement people now picking up the phone and calling us to say, hey, we're just about to start a request for proposals, we want accessibility brought in.
Mm-hmm.
Just that whole thing, and I know different companies are different places, and we didn't get there yet, like overnight. The team's been around for at least 10, 12 years. And so it's taken time, but since I've been there, it's just been amazing to watch how accessibility is really baked into what we do.
So you're here at Asuncion
Yeah.
in San Diego,
Yes.
doing a presentation on
Talking all about it.
on the approach that
Yeah.
you're using. So you mentioned accessibility being baked in.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about the
Well,
approach?
so I think what I'd like to say about that is it totally, what it does is and it rightfully as it should, it breaks accessibility into a shared responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
It would be so easy for everyone to just dump all of that work on the accessibility team. And I'm not just talking about at my organization, I'm talking everywhere. So as an accessibility team, you could just get bogged down serving one project.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we see over 300 projects a year, 400 projects a year. So we cannot be involved at that granular level with every single project. So what we've done is we've said, project managers, you have a role to play. QA testers, you have a role to play. Developers, you have a role to play. Designers, etc., etc. We will be there to train you on what your role is. We will give you the documentation you need in your role. We'll consult, we'll do all that kind of stuff. But as a project, you are ultimately responsible for delivering on accessibility. Our job as the accessibility team is to be your center of excellence. But what we want to continue to do is build that culture where it's a shared responsibility, particularly when it comes to things like testing. It should be that people should understand how to test for accessibility. And as people move on, those are skills that they can take wherever else they go.
Sure, absolutely.
But I'm really passionate about that piece, that it shouldn't be the accessibility team's sole responsibility. Like I said before, it would be so easy to do that. Let's give all that work to the accessibility team. And then what ends up happening there, as I said, that poor team will be bogged down on 1 or 2 projects, and what about the 60, 70 other ones
Sure.
that won't get any attention?
Absolutely. So we first met
That's right.
when I was doing a draft for public consultation of the standard I was creating. BS 8878 in some way came out of experiences that I'd had and others on my committee had in the UK, where we were trying to do the same thing that you were doing, to try and embed accessibility as a responsibility and as a competence across our organisation. I think one of the things for me that was quite important about that is probably even more important for me now, which is that I've seen numerous instances where there is somebody like you or like me in an organisation, someone with a real passion for accessibility, and because of that passion, the organisation gives that person the role to do all of that work. The problem then is that at some point we all move on.
Yes.
I'm no longer with the BBC, and I would hope that what I was able to do was to embed accessibility within the culture there, so that the fact that I am no longer there doesn't cause them a problem.
Right.
I mean, you mentioned the other aspect of that, which is people getting burnt out.
Yes.
And large organisations. How did you manage to get the different job roles? So you mentioned project managers, you mentioned procurement people, you mentioned QA testers, you mentioned developers. How did you manage to get them all bought into that vision that they needed to be responsible for their part of the puzzle?
I've got a team, and my boss who really has been leading the charge for the now more than 10 years at our organization for doing that. So all credit goes to him. We're more the heavy lifters in there. But what I will say is I think the fact that we have executives in our organization who talk about accessibility, I think that makes all the difference, because if you don't have that executive, that C-suite buy-in on accessibility, it makes it more challenging. But if people know, oh yeah, that's right, because the executives, that's an important thing to them, it helps, definitely, right? It helps support the whole thing. It's not just Jennison saying it has to be that way, or it should be that way. This is what our executive team wants. They want to build accessible apps. So that definitely, I think, is a big help, having executive buy-in. When a project comes to us, they have to follow a process. And we have steps that we give them, and we tell them, in development, you need to do X and Y, and then when you do testing, you need to test for accessibility. Here's some documentation to help you, and if you need some training on that, we'll provide it to you. How we got that to happen, first of all, we talked about it, we educated. We have, for example, an introduction to accessibility course that is mandatory for developers and for our business systems analysts, the people who do the requirements documents and that.
Sure.
If they're enrolled in a certain curriculum, they have to take this course. So there's part of it really, Jonathan, is the education. And once people are educated, as they're starting to step through their project, they're like, oh yeah, we don't forget, we have to think about accessibility here.
So it's that combination of executive buy-in,
yes,
and education of people,
and process, and being built in the process,
Absolutely.
so it stares them in the face.
That for me is key to what we did at the BBC as well, and that's why I was trying to, if you like, build that framework for how organisations could do that with BS 8878.
Because it's one thing to have something like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is amazing and important, but that's the anchor. That's the standard. But you need something like the standard you built to kind of open it up and to help people understand, so what are we supposed to do? Who's going to educate people on the guidelines? Who's going to make sure people are implementing them? Who's going to teach the developers how to do that? So what's neat about the standard that you built, and why I was happy to get on board, is that you understood that accessibility is more than just the guidelines. Naturally and necessarily, there's a wrapper around the guidelines, and the wrapper can include who's responsible for what. What about the people with disabilities? What do we need to think about for them? And so what I liked about, and why I was so enthusiastic when you were kind enough to ask for my opinion on it, was, wow, this is really neat, because you're not just pointing people to the guidelines. You're actually talking about the process and the people that is necessary in order to execute on and to achieve people's best efforts when it comes to accessibility.
This interview is one of 16 filmed to contribute to my book, Including or Missing 20% by Embedding Web and Mobile Accessibility. The book provides a full guide on how to transform your organisation to achieve the consistent creation of websites and mobile apps that are usable and accessible to all your customers at the most efficient cost. Find out more about the book by visiting hasseleinclusion.com/book. Did you like this video? If so, why not share it with your friends? and I've got many more videos on their way with other accessibility experts from all over the world, so make sure you don't miss them by subscribing to my channel. Thanks so much for watching.